Hey, welcome back to the Group Project Podcast. This is a very special episode because this is episode number 100. 100 episodes, which I'm excited about. I never would have thought we would have got here. And quite honestly, to celebrate episode number 100, we brought on like literally one of my favorite authors, whose book has changed. His book has changed my leadership, and he's laughing right now. And I know I've given him lots of, but it has absolutely changed the way I approach leadership as a school superintendent, a school leader. His name is Mark Horstman. Mark is the co-founder of Manager Tools, and he is the author of a book that I have our administrative team do a book study on, which is The Effective Manager. So Mark, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Jared.
So we're gonna, and I interviewed Mark, about a year or so ago. You can look up episode, I think it's like episode 34, something like that. But Mark gave an awesome interview. We talk about the idea of one-on-ones, which is the manager meeting with the direct reports. We also talked a little bit about delegation. I just asked Mark if you come back on, we just dig a little bit deeper. And by the way, Mark, Mark, not only does he's got podcasts, he's got so much content beyond his book, millions of downloads with his podcast. Go over and listen to, is it Manager Tools? Is that what it is?
We have three podcasts: Manager Tools, Career Tools, and Executive Tools. Manager Tools and Career Tools are free. Executive Tools you have to license. Manager Tools have been downloaded about 250 million times.
250 million. Wow. Nice. Very, very cool. So he's consulted with all the giants: Apple, General Motors, Department of Justice, GE, Morgan Stanley. I mean, you name it. So I'm just so happy that you're here with me, man. And one thing I didn't do last time was just, how can you just, for those of us younger, I guess I'm still a younger leader. Can you just talk a little bit about how you worked your way up to the chain of leadership and maybe your background and leadership there?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about leadership. I can talk about management. We don't spend a lot of time about leadership because nobody can define it. My definition of leadership is Napoleon's, which is, if you start to take Vienna, take Vienna. But my background is, I went to West Point, studied mechanical engineering, did not get into medical school, went into the Army, was a field artillery officer and then a special forces officer for 5 years. Got out, went to work at Procter & Gamble, sold Crest toothpaste for a while, did that very well. Never thought I'd ever be a salesman, but I was good at it. Got promoted a few times, left, became a recruiter for a couple of years. And then 27 years ago, I think, I started a management consulting firm, Horstman & Company. And the whole principle that Manager Tools is based on, I sold that 18 years ago and didn't want to work. And my business partner now, he wasn't my partner at the time, said, if you stop teaching people the stuff you taught me, he was a client, he's a classmate of mine. He said, nobody will learn this stuff. And he said, so we're going to do a podcast. And so all of the podcasts, the thing that makes us different is that we have data on all of our stuff. For all those years that I had my own firm, we would take large engagements with big firms, you name it. We consulted to them, and we would tell managers, okay, you're going to do one-on-ones, and this other group didn't. And we would compare the outcomes and agreed upon metrics based on the client. And it was so easy because at one-on-ones and feedback and coaching and delegation, all the Trinity, so outperformed everything else that we had more work that we could do. And so when I finally sold it, I think I had 125 employees, and so I was going to retire. And then he said, let's do the podcast. You can just share all that stuff for free, which is not a great economic model, but we've since done just fine.
How did you at what point did you realize, oh, wow, these one-on-one meetings is the key? You talked about the trend, you talked about the feedback, you talk about the delegation. But specifically with one-on-ones, was there some point in your career way back when you're like, this is it? This is what we need to be doing?
Yeah, so I don't know that there was a moment. What I would say is, I knew that the single most important thing I learned in the Army, leading troops under fire, and at Procter & Gamble, was trust. And I started doing research when I was a manager and discovered that trust was the thing. The higher your trust score is, the better results you get. No question. It's the most correlated factor. And trust isn't that hard to manage. You ask your directs on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust me? It's really easy. And so we needed to develop a way to develop trust. Well, sociologists and psychologists already had that figured out. I mean, this stuff is all old news. It's not even management theory, it's psychology, which is if you want to increase your trust with another person, all you have to do is communicate more frequently to them about things that are important to them. That's the way human beings build trust with other people, assuming you're an ethical person, which we always assume. So we just started teaching one-on-ones. But full disclosure, the first one-on-ones we taught, we had the managers go first. And it didn't work, by the way. And then we decided to have the directs go first. And that's really what worked. So it wasn't a moment so much as the data were so overwhelmingly good. I just said, well, we literally would just post the data and say, look, here's the data. You want to argue with it? Okay. But, and then we got overrun with business. And that's when the business grew.
So we jumped ahead. I jumped ahead one-on-ones. Maybe back us up a little bit. Maybe tell, I've read your book 3 or 4 times. I've taught it to other people. I've got other districts coming to me asking me, what are you doing with your direct reports? Right. But maybe I need to set a little bit of context here. Tell us what is a one-to-one, and you do a great job in your book, The Effective Manager, but maybe give us kind of the basics of a one-to-one.
Sure. First, let me say that I just signed a contract with our publisher, Wiley, and they want a second edition, a revised edition of The Effective Manager. That will come out sometime later this year. If you're interested in getting the first edition, you should buy it now. I hate to be a salesman, but because when the second edition comes out, they're gonna take out of print the first edition.
Okay.
And the second edition will address remote management and COVID and that kind of stuff. Actually, not COVID, but working from home and remote management, about which we have a great deal of data as well. Okay, so what are one-on-ones? When I say one-on-ones, now a lot of people talk about one-on-ones, but we actually have data that we've tested 15, 17, 19 different versions of one-on-ones, and here's what our data show. The most effective one-on-one you can have is scheduled. That's first. Scheduling is more important than anything else. Weekly. That's the magic frequency. Scheduled, weekly. The direct must go first. We learned that the hard way. You have to take notes, and it should be rarely missed. In other words, it should be a core meeting that you have. Our data show that if you have 85% of them, you don't need to have 100%. You can miss every once in a while. But 85% and above, basically somebody who does 90% of their one-on-one, somebody who does 95%, their metrics, the 2 key metrics for managers being results and retention, are essentially indistinguishable from one another. So scheduled, weekly, direct goes first, manager takes notes. That's it. Yeah. And we get arguments about all those. And I'm pretty good at addressing the arguments. I've been doing this for 25 years now.
And it's so good. In your book, you lay out what those arguments are going to be.
Oh yeah.
And I experienced all of the arguments that you forecasted for me.
Yeah.
Let's talk about who you would meet with though. So you talk about your direct reports, and quite honestly, like that's kind of a business term. I use direct reports here in education world, and people are like, what are you talking about? What is a direct report? Right. What is it? So maybe how many people should you be meeting with?
The status of management in education is truly horrendous. You should know that. I mean, you probably know that. I mean, it's really, really bad. Now, the reason why, and there are a lot of teachers and academicians who would say, well, we can't learn from corporations. When in fact, the reason corporations are such a rich source of data is because there are so many managers and there's such good databases there. And human beings behave in all vertically structured organizations. By the way, don't ask for a horizontal organization. That has its own much worse outcomes. But in a vertically structured organization, which by the way, sociologists agree that vertically structured human organizations are the greatest achievement in the history of mankind. Not the moon landing, not World War II, none of that stuff. It's human organizations, the ability to structure allow the separation of labor and so on. Anyway, so a direct report is somebody who reports directly to you. That's all. So for you, probably it would be your key staff at the district level, and probably your principals. It would not be teachers. Okay, you don't try to do one-on-ones with everybody in your organization, because now you might say, well, okay, what about the teachers? Well, the principals do one-on-ones with the teachers. Now, principals immediately say to me, well, I've got 85 teachers. Okay, fine. You should have heads of department, and they should be doing one-on-ones. Well, they don't like management. I don't care. There are parts of my job I don't like, and I have to do them. I don't like spreadsheets, but I use them all the time. So yeah, a direct report is somebody who, another way to think of it is, who do you have to write an annual review for? Not whose annual review do you initial because somebody else wrote it, but who considers you their boss? One of the things in academia that we've discovered, and we've consulted to probably 50 to 100 school districts, including the city of New York, city of Austin, Miami, Washington, D.C., Tulsa, all over the country, and many charter schools too. Hundreds of charter schools, and the general way to think about it is that the beauty of it is you get structure, when in fact usually in schools there's not necessarily a clear structure. There's a vague idea that person's the person I talk to for stuff, but teachers have this sense of, in my classroom, I'm autonomous, and so therefore I don't really need a boss. Well, in fact, you do. And your boss is not the HR person, heaven forbid. So it's just the great thing about one-on-ones, if you're not doing them, is you end up in this discussion about who's going to do one-on-ones with whom, and you start realizing we need to have clear structure, because it's not fair to anybody in an organization to not know who their boss is. People say, well, I don't want a boss. I promise you, we've studied that. The data from people who don't have bosses shows much lower retention, much lower satisfaction, much lower engagement, much lower happiness. Not that happiness is all that indicative of anything. And so having a boss, and having a clear boss, and knowing who it is, and having that boss engage in the right behaviors is a huge improvement in people's outcomes, results, and also in their likelihood of retention. Yeah.
Mark, one thing I remember from our first conversation, it's carrying over this, is you have such a good understanding. I mean, you and a good understanding of educational leadership hierarchy and how things work. I mean, being out, I would have thought you would have worked with, in schools your whole life, the way you can nail these perceptions about.
Well, I've been consulting to schools and school districts and universities, and we've trained, I would say, conservatively, we've trained 250,000 principals, superintendent staffs, or university staffs in both academic and non-academic departments in the last 25 years. Probably 10,000 people a year, roughly. Yeah. To say nothing of the many tens of thousands who listen to the podcast and are doing it on their own, but because it's free, I don't ever talk to them.
Okay, so you've got these. So you've got these weekly scheduled meetings.
Right. So by the way, I left one thing out. 30 minutes. That's the other. That's the fifth thing. 30 minutes long. Okay. Scheduled weekly, 30 minutes. The direct goes first, and the manager takes notes.
Okay. So, gosh, I guess.
But, let me talk about 30 minutes for a second.
Yeah.
We tried 20 minutes. We tried 15 minutes. Look, you could say, well, I prefer this or I prefer that. Well, unfortunately, the world we live in doesn't necessarily take as much seriousness to your preferences as to what works. Okay. The person who's a finance person that says, everybody in this organization uses Excel, but I don't like Excel, so I'm going to indulge my preference. Yeah, sorry. No, you're part of an organization. One of the reasons that we're struggling with that right now generally is because it's popular today to tell young people that you should be authentic. Yes, you should be yourself, but only now that you've joined an organization, you need to understand that when you join an organization, you give up about 30% of your freedom. And the beauty of that is you get an enormous return on that, way better than you could do on your own. I don't know that many fifth grade teachers who are operating independently from a school district, for instance, you get enormous benefits. It's like paying a tax to be part of a nation or a country or a state or a municipality. You get benefits from that, like roads and schools and so on. So the reason we teach 30 minutes is because we tried an hour and 45 minutes and 30 minutes and 20, and we tried biweekly and monthly and so on. And the highest return you can get for the highest number of people across the board, it's not even close, is 30 minutes once a week. That's all it takes. Now you might think, well, I don't have enough time, or what if my direct talks too little? Doesn't matter. Across the board, you'll find that if you establish a 30-minute standard, your directs will gradually adapt to it, and you'll adapt to it as well. So the beauty of it is, we have a saying in our company: in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person is king or queen. You don't need to compare yourself to whether you should be doing 15 minutes or 20 minutes. You don't need to do your own research. And by the way, your own research will be too small to generate any extrapolations from it. You should trust the larger set of data that we have and others have as well, not just us, and say to yourself, okay, 30 minutes appears the right thing. And where you ought to be focusing is on your relationship with your direct.
So you did a great job setting the stage. 30 minutes weekly. The direct goes first. The manager takes notes.
Right.
One thing I get, and I know I've done thousands of these meetings now. What do we talk about? And that's kind of a dumb question, but like when you're teaching new people to go through the one-on-one process and they say, well, what do we talk about? What do you say to them?
So two things. First of all, it's a completely normal question. And when you get it, if you're listening to this podcast and you decide, hey, I like this idea, I want to do it. First of all, don't worry. It will be okay. Okay. Now, people will say, what are we going to talk about? Okay. So the primary thing you're going to talk about is work. Okay. But I'm going to go back a step and say this. We have a rule here. Never introduce a change to how you manage people without first taking the time to introduce that change before you make it. So one of the things we teach, and you'll find it in the book and you'll find it in our podcast as well, even in more detail, is you don't start one-on-ones simply by sending an email to people saying, we're going to start doing one-on-ones. I mean, you do that, but then you also brief them on what a one-on-one is, so they have some understanding. The worst thing in the world is people say, well, I'll send individual notes to everybody. And so everybody gets an individual note. And so if Jared works for me, he gets this individual notes from his boss saying, I'd like to start meeting with you privately once a week. He freaks out. He thinks he's in trouble. So you send a broadcast email to everybody. If you don't know what to say in that email, you can come to our website. It's free. We've already written the email for you. We tested 12 different versions of emails, and this is the one that's the most accepted by the most people, and it explains what one-on-ones are. Then after you announce that, then you also say, and I'm going to have a briefing during one of our times where we can do professional development. I'm going to take 30 minutes. I'm going to walk you through what the one-on-ones are about. You can ask me questions. Okay. And I won't have all the answers because this will be new to me as well, but I believe this will be effective for you and I, both of us. So you announce that first. That reduces a great deal of the drama, tension, and conflict that inevitably occurs when people who haven't been managed well before start getting managed. And then you tell them what we're going to talk about during your portion of the one-on-one. So typically we teach an agenda that is the direct gets 10 minutes, the manager gets 10 minutes, and then you get 10 minutes to talk about the future. Now, that is an aspirational agenda, because the average one-on-one, we surveyed about 6,000 managers and their directs. It's been 10, 12 years ago. And we discovered that the average direct talked during a manager tools one-on-one. These managers learned it from us. The average direct talked for 21 minutes. That's the average. And the average manager talked for 15 minutes, meaning the average length of time of a one-on-one that's supposed to be 30 minutes actually goes long. Many managers think, oh, I'm worried that my people won't talk enough. That's not the problem. Believe me, folks, that is not the problem. The problem is not your people not talking enough. A couple of people will be reticent in the beginning because probably they've had a bad boss who's used their stuff against them before, and they're right to be careful. And gradually over time, when you repeatedly have your weekly meeting with them and you repeatedly allow them to go first and you repeatedly allow them to share what's on their mind and ask you questions and ask about things and tell you what they're doing in their classrooms and so on, if they're a teacher, or if they're a principal, what's going on in their school and so on, gradually things start to open up a little bit. Typically, people don't last more than 4, 5, 6 weeks before they're filling up their time. But again, to your question, you tell them, you can talk to me about anything you want. If you want to talk about your family, you can talk about your family. If there's stuff going on in your family that's good or bad and you want me to know about it, share it. If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to. But here's what our data show. 79% of direct reports want to talk about work. 86% of managers want to talk about work. So in answer to your question, the vast majority of one-on-ones tend to be about work. Okay. If you're my boss, Jared, I want to tell you what I've done. I want to update you on the project you assigned to me a month ago that's due next month. I want to ask you questions about budget, or if I don't have any budget, I want to talk to you about the people I've been working with and who's been helpful and who hasn't. I want to understand more about this vague area you mentioned earlier. And then during your portion, if you're my boss, you're going to probably be asking about updates on projects and status and how various teachers are doing. Maybe there are a couple of teachers in your school that are struggling right now, or we've had to go observe them in classes and so on. And so we'll be checking on their status. And our top teachers, we're going to ask them, what are we doing to have them teach other teachers? What are we, how are we preparing for our next I'm blanking on the name now, for the days off where teachers get professional development in services and so on, those kinds of things. The problem is not people talking too little. The problem is people talking too much. I promise you. And look, your boss controls your addiction to food, clothing, and shelter. People have a self-preservation naturally inside them. They want their boss to know what's going on. Yeah. So we don't have problems. 1 out of every 694 directs actually sort of folds his or her arms and says, I don't want to talk. And that usually only lasts 2 or 3 months. And then they gradually start opening up a little bit. And the way that 2 to 3 to 4 months happens is you say to them, you may not want to talk, but we're still going to have this meeting because it's important to me to have a relationship with you. Even if it's not important to you, it's important to me. And what you could say is, at the end of the year, I have to write your performance review. I don't want to have to do that and wonder or guess. I want to have a good relationship with you. I want to have talked about the things that are going to go in your review. And that means I need to spend time with you, because that's what I would want if I were a direct. I'd want a boss who was interested and cared about me. Look, there's no way in hell that a principal can micromanage a teacher. So a teacher saying, well, I don't want you to manage me too much. How can I manage you too much? I'm giving you, out of the 6 or 7 hours you're teaching a day, I'm probably going to see you for 5 minutes. So there's not going to be any of that.
So, okay, I'm going to a little bit of context for our educational leaders who are listening. I've shared this in a number of my blog posts. The people I meet with weekly are, and I'm as a superintendent role in a relatively small district, and Mark nailed it earlier, are my 5 directors, right. The directors that oversee the 5 different departments: transportation, business,
facilities, whatever.
Facilities, yeah. You nailed it. Right. Food service.
Yeah.
And then we've got 3 building principals. So we got 3 buildings that I right. oversee, and I meet with them. I've also got our director of curriculum, student services, and then my secretary as well. So I think that's 10 that I do weekly. So we've set the stage. So wait,
hold on. You said 10. And there are people right now who are listening to this podcast who are losing their minds. And they're saying, oh yes. My God, I'm so busy. I can't take 10 times 30. I can't take 5 hours out of my week. So I'm going to start with an anecdote. I taught 2 U.S. presidents, President Bush and President Clinton, to do one-on-ones. And they both did them for the last 7 years of their time in the White House. I'm sorry, who's ever listened to this podcast, you ain't the president of the United States. If he has time, or some point, hopefully she has time, if they have time to do one-on-ones, guess what? Principal, superintendent, even a teacher in charge of a department, you have time. Now, we make another promise. If you start doing one-on-ones our way, you follow our model, don't change it a great deal. You can make subtle adjustments and so on, but if you do one-on-ones our way, we guarantee you will get more time back in your calendar than you spend in one-on-ones. Why? Because you're probably being beat to death right now by all kinds of people pinging you at all kinds of hours. I need this, or I want that, or whatever. And it's always very tactical. There's no relationship building. There's no trust building. In fact, it becomes a very transactional relationship, which sociologists would tell you is not a trusting, not a deep, not a lasting relationship. So when you say 10 and everybody goes, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly do that. As a general rule, it's a little bit hard if you have more than 10 or 12 directs to start weekly. Some people, I would say, if you've got 15 directs and you want to start bi-weekly and then get used to that for 3 or 4 or 5 months and then go to weekly, you can do that. I know nurse managers who have 30 directs and they do 30 one-on-ones a week. Yeah, that's 15 hours a week. And they have way better patient scores and nurse retention scores than managers who say, I don't have time for it. The problem is, the reason, one of the reasons one-on-ones work is it connects you with individuals and because it addresses the issue of inefficiency. Most managers are just really inefficient. So, all right, I interrupted. I'm sorry.
No, you nailed it. Because I was going to give you the 2, and you nailed the first one I was going to ask you about. See, I kind of share in different settings. I share how we operate here, and I encourage other leaders to adopt kind of some of the same ideas. And these are veteran, these are veteran leaders who've been doing this for years. Males, females, doesn't matter. But it's hard for me as a relatively newer superintendent. Like, what do you know? They've been doing it in bigger districts than me, and they've got 20, 30 years of doing this. The 2 biggest things they will tell me is, I don't have time to meet with them, which you just kind of talked about. The other thing, Mark, is a lot of times they'll say, and I'm throwing you a softball because you nail it in your book, but I want to hear your response is, well, I talk to them all the time.
Yeah.
I talk to them all the time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just mention another data point. It's been about 15 years ago. I haven't checked lately, but 86 of the CEOs of the Fortune 100 companies in America were doing one-on-ones our way. No offense, they talk to their people all the time too. Educators and academicians you're not special. I'm sorry. I love what you do. I've had 3 kids educated by the public school systems in America, and I was educated by the public school system. My 3 brothers were. My mom was the president of the school board when I went to graduate from high school in 1978, which I'm sure your listeners thinking, God, he's old. No, I'm just really experienced. And I will tell you, you're not that different if you're in a large organization. What you do is special. What you give to America in terms of citizenry is special. But in terms of the organization you're serving, you're not special. It's a human organization. You need to have a trusting relationship with your boss, and you ought to be willing to invest in it. So when they talk to their people all the time, yes, they do. But they talk to their people all the time about tactical things. The direct needs this, or the direct needs that. In fact, I always joke, the manager thinks to himself, let's pretend that the manager needs to talk to the principal needs to talk to one of his teachers. And so he says, well, she's in class or he's in class, so I'm going to send him an email. Great. But let's say for some reason he's sitting in his office and he's writing an email and he's forgotten that she's on her break period. And he sees her walk by and go into the lounge. So he decides he's going to walk over and talk to her in person. Why not? I talk to my people all the time, right? By the way, we've discovered that the people who say I talk to my people all the time, they lump together texts and Slacks and emails all as talking, which is literally like somebody ought to chop their hands off for saying that. It's just not true. But because talking is actually talking like what we're doing now. But that said, I see my direct teacher, I'm a principal, walk into the lounge. And so I go in and I sit down and I said, hey, do you have a minute? Now, guess what she's going to say? She's going to say yes. And I can assure you, Mr. Principal, it's not because you're awesome and she was waiting for you to show up. Oh, please, I hope the principal shows up. She says yes because you're her boss. I joke that people don't laugh at your jokes, boss, because they're funny. They laugh at them because they're yours, because you control their addiction to food, clothing, and shelter. So you have to do something to reduce the fear of role power that exists. And I know you think, no, we're all just friends. Believe me, you don't want to be friends with your directs. We have a podcast called Can I Be Friends with My Directs? And the first word of the podcast is no, you can't. You can be friendly. You can have a trusting, caring, even in some cases, loving relationship with them. But no, you're their boss. In any event, if I go down and want to talk to her, she'll give me time. But in that conversation, there are so many managers say, sure. I say, well, how's your weekend and so on. And the manager thinks that they're being some sort of masterful, social, gifted person by saying, how was your weekend? It's embarrassing. And here's the thing. You're going to get done in that conversation what you want to get done. You're going to achieve your tactical mission. But that is nothing about what your direct needs, wants, likes, or desires from you. If you don't give your directs time every week to come to you and give them time to prepare, that's one of the two things directs say about one-on-ones. First, it gives me time to prepare. If you don't give them time to prepare, then they won't bring up a such subject that's touchy. And if it's in the lounge and there's other people sitting around, they're not going to bring up something that's sensitive or that involves another teacher that they're in conflict with, or the chances that they can get promoted that somebody else might hear them, or, hey, I'm thinking that maybe I want to be a principal. What do I need to do? They're not going to have that conversation after you've asked them about Project X, or, hey, how is that class doing that I know you've had trouble with in the last couple of weeks, and so on. They're not going to do it. They need time to get ready for that conversation. And too many principals get a note from some teacher that says, I'd like to talk to you. And like, well, teacher says, well, the principal says, well, maybe next week. Well, like, wow, this is important to me, but it's apparently not as important to you as whatever you're doing this week. And by the way, I don't even know what's on your calendar. So the part of the purpose of one-on-ones is not that any particular one-on-one is important, but the direct always knows they're going to have time to talk to you. And if you're wondering whether or not that's important and you think about your directs, ask yourself how it would be if you suddenly didn't have time to talk to your boss, which is probably true for most educators in America today. Whenever you're wondering how your directs will respond to something, ask yourself how you would respond if you were the direct and you were getting this information from your boss. Almost everybody who says, hey, if you got an email from your boss saying, I'd like to sit down and talk to you every week, I'm going to do this for all my directs, you're going to get to talk first. If you take the entire 30 minutes, I'll be okay with that. I really will, because it's your agenda that's first. It's your agenda that's most important. That's why the direct goes first. Everyone says, yeah, I'd like that. But then somehow when managers are asked to do one-on-ones, oh, my people won't like that. What do you think? They're that much different than you? You're that much cooler or specialer or smarter than them? No, people are people all the world over. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering about cultural differences, there's no difference culturally. We have trained on every continent in the world, except Antarctica. No people, no budget, no golf. I'm not going. China, Australia, Kazakhstan. We trained the 82nd Airborne Division to do this in Fallujah. I've been to Afghanistan, I've been to India, I've been to Singapore. You name the airport in America that has service, scheduled service, I've flown there and I've trained. You name the industry, we've been at. Small companies, all the way from all the way up to Walmart and the Department of Defense and the White House and every cabinet office in the US government, you name it, works everywhere. So,
Mark, here's one bit of pushback I've gotten here that I've struggled with a little bit, and I haven't had the right words. I think I know what to tell. I've tried to say a few things, but I want to hear what the expert has to say here. Okay. So a lot of our principals oversee two individuals who do basically the same thing in the building. And I want to be really careful because I don't want to call anybody out, but two people do basically the same thing. They have the same roles. And they say, hey, can't we just meet together with the principal? Can't we just meet together? And I'm like, I'll admit, Mark, I've given in a little bit on this. I have. Mark, why would you say that you're kind of, help me out here.
No, I'm sorry. No, just no. First of all, well, that wouldn't be a one-on-one now, would it? Second of all, there is always, regardless of how similar the role is, the people are different. And we do not have relationships with roles or titles. We have relationships with people. Each of those persons deserve their own time. It's the people that matter. I mean, look, I'm an engineer. Some of you could probably tell by listening. I'm not naturally a people person. I'm an engineer. I don't like people. My favorite thing to do is to play golf alone. Okay, I'm going to do that in about half an hour. But I will tell you something. My first law of life is it's all about people. It's not about roles. It's not about titles. It's not about responsibilities. It's about people. Each individual is worthy. You mentioned men and women earlier. We get all this stuff. Well, you need to teach more about gender. No, we don't. We have ample evidence about success in every field known to man and woman, humankind. Men and women perform equally. Women are equally good as managers. Now, some women say, well, we're better nurturers. Actually, the data don't support that at all. Not at all. Men and women are essentially equal when they come into organizations, all things being equal, which sometimes they're not. And there is male bias against women, and there is female bias against men. But every person is an individual. They have their own wants, needs, and desires. And having both of them together, in fact, I would even go a step further and say two people, and we would call, I think what you're talking about, two in a box, by the way. That's a classic corporate phrase. You want the individual relationship with each one of those because they may want to bring up something that's a problem between the two of them. And they would say, well, it's more efficient. And it's more efficient if you meet with both of us together. It might be more efficient for you, but it's not more efficient for my relationship with each one of you. And what's more, I won't hear everything that I want to hear. Further, we want you to establish your own ways of working with each other, which is why we have a whole bunch of data on what we call peer one-on-ones. Those two people who are two in a box, they should be meeting each in a weekly one-on-one themselves between each other. Yeah, and if me and Bob report to you, when I tell you something and you mention, hey, by the way, Mark mentioned this, and Bob said, well, I didn't know that. So you should talk to Mark about that. And so Bob in our next one-on-one will say, hey, Jared mentioned that you had said this. And I say, yeah, Bob, I'm really sorry. I didn't tell you about that. But yeah, I mentioned that to Jared. Yeah, that improves my and Bob's relationship as well. But it's just like the old phrase, oh, this is how I manage my team. Okay, you don't manage a team. You manage the individuals on the team. Imagine, for instance, this is a great example. A new woman comes to work for me. I'm a principal, and a new female teacher comes to work for me, and she says, I'm really excited. I said, I'm really excited too. And I really think I'll be a good boss to you because I've managed a bunch of other women, and I'll be managing you the way I managed all of them. We don't manage groups. We don't manage roles or titles or responsibilities. We manage individuals. Each woman, each man, each person, each soul is different, and they should be treated differently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I love it. I need some of that. Like I said, we got a group has really bought into this idea, but you're right. Some of the efficiency they're saying, well, might be easier for just the two of us meet with the principal,
easier.
But
because easier is better. Yeah, we want it to be easier. You know what? You want to be great. It's hard. It's hard work. It really is. Greatness isn't easy. You should see how the guys at Apple work. I've trained tens of thousands of people at Apple. Yeah. They work hard.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears here slightly, and then we're going to get into delegation. Then we're going to get you out of here for your golf there. So, one thing that I was looking through my notes from your book, and I love what you talk about the redirection conversations. Specifically, okay, so say you give redirection to a direct report and the direct report gets defensive. In your book, you say, we recommend that you give in. When a direct argues or gets defensive. That's not a lot of managers' natural inclination is to give in. Explain the thinking behind that.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, you called it redirection. I don't call it redirection. We call it feedback, for the record. And so if you work for me, I'm responsible for my output and your output and all the other directs who work for me. I have a good trusting relationship with you. So when you do something good, I'm going to say, hey, Jared, can I can I give you some feedback? Or can I share something with you? You're going to say, yeah. I say, when you did that thing that you did just there, when you said that in the meeting, or when you met my deadline, or when you reached out to that other person, whatever it is you did, I really appreciated it. Or, hey, it helped me do this, or it helped me do that. Thank you. That's positive feedback. Okay. Now, what you're talking about is negative feedback. Now, look, everybody wants to talk about negative feedback. And frankly, just between you and me and the fence post, it pisses me off. The road to success as a manager when it comes to performance communication is not negative feedback. Every manager wants to hear about it because they're afraid of it and it's so uncomfortable. Well, part of the reason it's uncomfortable is you're doing it wrong. Okay, you're redirecting people. Your job is not to redirect people. If you trust them, you should tell them that what they did wasn't as effective as it could have been, and you should ask them to do it better next time. That's all. Look, if you make a mistake at 10 in the morning, and I talk to you at noon about it because I get an email or I find out about it after the fact, and I want to mention it to you, and I mention it to you with a good heart, and I'm polite about it. For instance, here's an example. You missed the deadline at 10 in the morning. I have to call you at noon, and you bring the stuff to my office, and then you say, I say, hey, before you go, can I give you some feedback? And you say, yeah. This, folks, just so you know, this is exactly how it sounds. Talk to my directs. They'll tell you this is how it sounds. Say, when you miss the deadline, it slows me down, dude. Can you be on time next time? And you say, yeah. And I said, we're done. That's it. There's no attack. There's no, now what you say is, well, there's 5 other things that happen. I said, you know what? That's okay. Because there's nothing I can do about what already has happened. I don't care what already happened. Everybody wants to defend themselves. I don't want you to defend yourself. The purpose of feedback has nothing to do with what already happened. The purpose of feedback is, if it's negative, is to change your behavior in the future. The purpose of positive feedback is to get you to do more of that thing in the future. The entire purpose of feedback. At noon, I can't change what happened at 10 a.m., but I can influence what happens in the future because I'm your boss and I'm going to make a suggestion. But I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to do it. I'm just going to ask you to change it if it was bad, or if it was good, I'm going to ask for more of the same thing. So when people say, well, you don't understand, I say, well, okay, fine. But I've made my point. It didn't turn out good, and I would like it better next time. And what we're trying to do is change the conversation. And we're not trying. We've been doing this for 25 years. It works like a charm. You say to them, look, I'm not worried about what happened. I trust you. I believe you did your best, and it just didn't turn out good. And both you and I know that, and it's okay. And you know what? You'll have another chance to do better next week, and we'll see how you do then. I've forgiven you. In fact, forgiveness, which, by the way, comes from knowing yourself well enough and being at peace about yourself, which many managers have a problem with. And they never got this from their boss, so they don't know any better. Forgiveness is an incredible thing. If you deliver feedback with the tone of forgiveness, you won't get the pushback. The reason why managers now get so much pushback is they're giving crappy feedback. They're saying, I didn't like the way you did X. Well, that's not feedback, that's judgment. So you have to do it the same way every time. You have to do it with a polite and positive and pleasant, non-threatening tone of voice. Hey, can I give you some feedback? When you did that, that was great. Thank you. And hey, when you did that, that wasn't so good. Can you work on that next time? That's all. And by the way, of our very best managers we've ever followed, we followed them for 15 years. The cohort started about 1900, ended up being about 1100 because they had retired. A bunch of them have retired. Their average, the ones that outperformed everybody else by 2 standard deviations. So ask your statistics professor about that one. 2 standard deviations. Their ratio of positive to negative feedback was 9 positive to 1 negative.
Wow.
The problem is not negative feedback. The problem is a lack of trust between your direct and you because you're not doing one-on-ones, and a poor delivery of the feedback. And one more thing. The popular press right now says, you should give your directs a chance to explain why they did what they did. No, you should not. We spent 6 years testing that. It only leads to a longer conversation about what happened in the past, and it actually increases their feelings that what they did was right. And the more they feel that what they did was right, even if it turned out wrong, they're learning 2 bad lessons. 1, that you can be right even with bad results, and 2, that they get to defend themselves. But failure to achieve an objective is not defensible. And so we have to teach people over time, slowly, that what they did is not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is the results that the district or the school or the class had because of it. Yeah.
Hey guys, if you're joining us late, this is episode 100 with Mark Horstman. Mark is the co-founder of Manager Tools. He's the author of the book I've got in my hands right now, The Effective Manager. But there's a new edition coming out soon. So if you're going to read the first edition, get it soon because it's going to be out of print here. He's also got all that he mentioned the podcast earlier, the Manager, the 3 different podcast options. Before we get you out of here, Mark, I want to talk about delegation because you've got it's the 4th critical behavior in your book.
Yep.
You've got some just really just some ideas that make sense. And this idea about pushing down work. And I'm going to try to just summarize, that if there's a task that both you and one of your directs can do, then you need to push that work down, right? To the person with the cheaper labor, right? That idea. So maybe just anything else you want to share about delegation, because it's to me, delegation is something that leaders struggle with. And I don't know if you see that in other
academia struggles even more.
Oh, it's so
bad.
You guys
are so risk averse. Yeah.
Yes. So explain your thoughts there. You know this so well. So give us a few thoughts on delegation.
Yeah, this is organizational theory 101, really. The organization wants work to be done at the lowest possible level because it's cheaper. And folks, I know you think that's a terrible thing to hear, cheaper, but in fact, it's good for budgets. If we got work pushed down to the lowest possible level, budgets would not be a problem anymore. But basically the idea is, another way to think of it rather than cheaper is, if you work for me, Jeremy, and I could do something and you can do something, and you could do something that I can do, but I continue to do it, you begin to develop the belief that I don't trust you enough to do it. Now, I'm going to go a step further. Some people would say, well, I can't ask my people to do that because they're already super busy. Okay, fine.
Yes.
We hear that a lot, but you're doing it and you're super busy. So apparently somebody above you suggested you should do it. And this brings up the whole thing of, folks, you're not going to get all your work done. I mean, I don't know anybody who gets all their work done every day. And so therefore, the real question is not whether you have time to do it, but how important is it relative to all the other things you're doing, so that over time, the really effective manager and executive figures out what he or she is not going to do, and they're willing to get in trouble for that, because I know I have too much to do. My family certainly outranks my work. Heaven forbid, let's hope that's true, right? We preach that all the time at Manager Tools. You don't need to work 60-hour weeks, but if I'm doing it, and I know you could do it, why wouldn't I want you to do it? What's more, for any teacher that wants to become a principal, you want them to learn the kind of things that principals do before they ever become a principal. Heaven forbid the entire job is new to them, because it'll crush them. And there are a lot of people who get promoted. Their bosses didn't delegate to them. They take over the job. Everything is new. Everything crushes them. They're the one that struggles. The board relieves them. And the person who's really responsible is not them. It's their previous boss who didn't delegate and didn't expose them to the kind of jobs that happen at the next level. So it's a succession planning problem as well.
So I'm going to ask you something. This is so good, Mark. I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is like exactly what I love hearing. Okay. In traditional school leadership, there's a lot of, and I know we use the word managerial tasks, which are the tedious tasks, the paperwork, and that might sound bad. I'm trying to say this like, all these, they're supposed to do the budgets, they're supposed to do the paperwork, and they're supposed to do and what I'm trying to do is I want to get so I can work on the bigger, so I can do the one-on-ones, right? So what I guess I don't know what my question is.
So I'll give you an answer to that real quick.
Yeah,
for principals, I've always told principals this: if you're sitting at your desk working on a budget and you're not meeting with people, you're doomed. Okay? Doomed. Now, you might say, well, I don't know, how am I going to get this done? I'll tell you how you get it done. You get it done the same way the teachers get their work done. They teach during the day and they grade stuff at night. Principals, you should be doing your paperwork at night. Okay? Now, frankly, it's not that hard. You can figure out how to get more of it done, and you could ask your staff to do a great deal more of it. A lot of principals take a lot of, if you'll pardon my saying so, really crappy input from their directs on staff at the district, and then the principal ends up going through all of it himself or herself. And no, don't accept that from them. Say, return it back to them. Essentially delegate it back to them and say, no, this isn't what I wanted. You need to do this and this and this and this and this, and I want it back here by such and such a time. And we might go through 3 or 4 iterations of that the first time, and then the second time we'll only have 2, and the third time finally we're going to get a budget right. But that kind of paperwork, yeah, it happens at night and on the weekends to some degree. Yeah, because I know a lot of principals who think, well, this is managerial task, and so I'm a manager. I'm a working manager, so therefore that's a managerial task. No, management is about people. It's not about paperwork. So we want to spend time with people. I'll tell you, I got a really easy way to spend less time on what you might call managerial tasks. You know where principals should be? In the classroom. Every single one of your teachers, you should be in their classroom. And I don't mean for 15 minutes just to check. I mean, you tell that teacher, hey, look, once a month or once every 6 weeks or once every 2 months, I'm going to be in your classroom before the bell rings all the way to the end of the bell. I want to see what you're doing. Now, teacher's going to be like, oh, I can't even believe that. How do you expect me to be a good boss unless I get to see how great you are in your room? I'm going to be looking for ways to praise you, to give you positive feedback. And yeah, there'll be a couple of things you could work on. Heck, there were a couple of things I could work on, and I would have loved my principal to tell me about that in January or February or in March, rather than reading about it in December at the end of the school year when I get my performance review. And there's this vague notion that, well, wasn't that pleasing? There were some problems, but I'm sorry I didn't talk about it. There should be no surprises on somebody's performance review. So the way to minimize your time spent doing managerial tasks is to prioritize and put on your calendar time in the classroom. I can't imagine being a principal today, and there's nobody who can convince me otherwise. There's no legitimate professional reason for a principal not being in one classroom for at least 1 hour or whatever the length of the classroom time period is every day. I mean, if you read a good example, if you read probably one of the most seminal management books of the last 30 years, is called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters, a McKinsey guy. And one of the chapters in there is called Management by Walking Around. You can't sit at your desk and manage. You have to go. Patton once said, never believe the first report from the front. And he said, I want to go out and talk to the guys actually at the front. And Patton was one of our greatest leaders in World War II. And there are thousands of other stories. CEOs spend 30 to 40% of their time on the road. Do you think they got these cushy jobs? They're flying. Yeah, sometimes they have private jets, but I've been in corporate private jets. It's not that great. Everybody's working head down the whole time, on the way to Europe, on the way to Asia, and so on. And they're meeting with customers, and they're meeting with managers. So principals need to get their butts out of their seats and go visit the teachers so that they can develop credibility, so they can tell them, when they tell them positive feedback about the session, hey, you started on time, you ended on time. I love the way you took roll. I love the way you answered Abigail's question about this. I love the way you answered Jonah's question about that, and so on. You got to see that stuff. And if you do that, you'll discover that you have less time to spend on those managerial things. And guess what? You'll discover you can do what used to take you an hour. You'll discover you can do it in half an hour. Now, it may not be as perfect, and it may not be with cute stuff, but I've seen principals and other district staff spend hours and hours on a PowerPoint presentation. Let me tell you something. You need, at the start of every school year, to have a standardized PowerPoint presentation template, and every single presentation that comes out of that school, that district, has the exact same template. Nobody gets to create special templates, period, full stop. That's it. This idea that everybody gets to create their own PowerPoints and they spend hours moving images around. Geez, what are we talking to third graders here? Salivated images? No.
So
no,
Mark,
sorry.
once you're done with that second edition of the Effective Manager, I think you need to write a school leadership book, man. You're just nailing so many truths. I mean, I would have thought you've been in school leadership for like for the last 40 years, the way you nailed all those ideas. You're exactly right. So Mark, is there anything else before I get you out of here that you wanted to share or that you feel like you didn't get to?
Yeah, I'll just say one more thing. Manager Tools is a very tactical thing. All of the books, I have another book, The Effective Hiring Manager. We're going to do an effective executive equivalent. We're going to do an effective professional book as well. But I, in all the tactics, because I never got executives who would tell me, here's how to handle that situation in detail. We have a podcast called What to Do If One of Your Directs Has Body Odor. Now, people will laugh at that, but if one of your colleagues has body odor, you need to know how to handle it. And we tested a number of different versions and found out which worked best, and then we put it in a podcast for free. But so that's very tactical. But now I want to go up to the spiritual plane for a second. If you really want to be great, if you truly want to be great, the answer is love. And by love, I mean professional love, the willingness to risk yourself for somebody else. I will tell you that the great teachers that I have known in my lifetime and that have become principals in many cases, and many of them actually choose not to be principals because they love being a teacher so much. They always said, I love those kids. I love them. Okay, so teachers, if you're listening, district staff, if you're listening, those are the great teachers, right? You need to learn how to love your colleagues and love your district and love the people in your school. Okay, you need to share love with those people, which means, again, respecting them, communicating with them, being willing to risk yourself for their and the organization's benefit. The answer is love, which usually, frankly, starts with communication. I said my first law is it's all about people. My second law is more communication is better.
Mark, you just nailed it, man. I mean, I just had such a good time just listening to you. I mean, I don't know how somebody could not listen to these last 45 minutes and come away with just some great ideas. And again, I'm telling you guys, I implemented one-to-ones, 3 or 4 years ago, and it has been the single best thing I've done in my leadership career is these one-on-ones. And Mark, I just want to thank you for just not only for today, but for just sharing what you've learned over the years and your research and all that. It just really has made a huge difference on me and a lot of other educational leaders.
It's my pleasure, and I will come back anytime you want, because the work that teachers and principals and superintendents are doing, creating our future citizens, is more important than anything that's happening in any corporate organizations or government organizations in the world. American citizenry is the greatest citizenry in the world, and it comes from parents and teachers.
All right, Mark, you got a tea time here in about 10 minutes. What are you going to shoot?
I do. I shot par yesterday, so we hope to beat par.
Nice, man. All right, man. Well, hey, good luck. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to that second edition, and we will be in touch. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks, man.